it was going to be the Democratic Party. And people feeling like voting in and of itself is futile.
Greetings, comrades. I want to list for you what I think are the three absolute worst presidential elections in my lifetime. Well, in my voting lifetime, which is since I was 18, which is several decades ago. And I'm judging them based on not only who was running in the presidential elections, but also the conditions they had to deal with and the conditions they created, and also what that meant moving forward. You'll see what I mean in a moment. All right, number one on the list was the 2000 election, which wound up being between Al Gore, George W. Bush, and I'm going to throw in Ralph Nader because that's important, even though he only got a tiny percentage of the vote. The 2000 election, I'm throwing out there because it's not that Al Gore was a particularly bad candidate. And on paper, neither was George W. Bush a particularly bad candidate at first appearance. But the Republican Party had that election rigged. It was stolen. And it was stolen in broad daylight. The Supreme Court of the United States assisted with the election theft. It was basically a judicial coup. And this isn't controversial to any honest person who's even marginally aware of what went down that year. This is not even controversial that it was stolen in broad daylight. And even that's not the worst of that election. The worst part of that election is that moving forward, liberals very soon, how would you put it, made themselves comfortable with that theft. And in some cases, many cases, too many cases, instead of blaming the real culprits, the Supreme Court, the Democrats who capitulated instead of fighting tooth and nail against certifying the election, the thieves themselves, they decided to scapegoat Ralph Nader because they said he made the margin, he stole Democratic votes not actually stole, but he played spoiler in Florida, which was the pivotal state in 2000, and took votes that would have gone to Al Gore, and that's how we wound up with George W. Bush. And that's not even the worst of it. After all that transpired during the Bush administration, all the horrible crimes and what have you, years later, George W. Bush was rehabilitated by liberals. He didn't exactly become a hero, but it was as if all his sins were forgiven by some of the same people who will still point to Al Gore as the culprit for those sins. Okay, second worst presidential election in my book, 2012. It was Barack Obama versus, I can't even remember who he ran against because it wasn't important. It was Mitt Romney. And the reason I list this one is because Obama, from a purely political standpoint, was essentially a shoo-in. And that was horrifying to me at the time because he came in with all this false promise, and it was false. Again, anyone who was paying attention, and I understand that's a very small percentage of the population that had the wherewithal and the political background to be able to pay attention to what was going on and to look at things that were not necessarily readily apparent. They would have understood what Obama was when he came in. I can't say he was a Trojan horse for all these reactionary policies because, well, those policies are just normal anyway. It's just that he drew in so many people who probably wouldn't have voted otherwise. And his marketing team, I can't really call him anything else, his marketing team knew how to sell this false hope, these empty platitudes to the masses who are probably just so fatigued of 8 years of the Bush administration in some cases. They were ready for this, and it was sold to them, and people bought it in droves, and Obama very soon proved that he was just a piece of shit wrapped in fancy bread, and it was just an awful 4 years of capitulating, seemingly capitulating to right-wing policies, making excuses for why they couldn't do this or that, and then just getting waylaid in the 2010 midterms as a result of that massive capitulation and refusal to do anything meaningful that was good. Well, even after 4 years of that, all your liberal institutions that, you know, would supposedly get out the vote, they all lined up behind, either they stayed silent or they lined up behind Obama again, even after seeing what he really was. And this was, if you were going to buck the two-party system, that was the year. 2012, Jill Stein was on the ballot in vast majority of states and represented more than enough electoral votes. But there was so much inertia. There's so much, what's the good word for this? It was so sclerotic, as far as morally sclerotic, voter bases and institutions. So there was not going to be any movement away from the Democratic Party. But the opportunity was there. I know there was not much chance of it, and that makes it the second worst election for me. The third worst, and I make it probably is not the worst or the second worst, only because it was so comical, was the 2016 election. We all know what happened there. Most of us who are alive now should remember that, where after 8 years of Obama shucking and jiving and pushing everything to the right in our faces, so many left-leaning or fringe voters were just totally disillusioned. And who did the Democrats throw up? Fucking Hillary Clinton. You've got to be kidding me. And they knew she was an awful candidate. So what did they do? They played the Pied Piper strategy, propping up, getting all their media buddies to prop up Donald Trump in the Republican primaries, because they figured he's such a repellent candidate, he will scare people into coming out and voting for Democrats, and he will probably even turn off some Republicans. Well, that backfired, and we got Trump for 4 years. So, I want to close by saying I think the 2024 presidential election is going to by far be worse than any of those, and we're already seeing why. Because the Democrats are positioning themselves, as always, as the lesser evil. But unfortunately, the lesser evil is now genocide. The White House and pretty much nearly all of Democrats in both houses of Congress are full on behind this genocidal campaign that we are funding, giving diplomatic cover for, and not only are they backing this genocide, but you see down to the mayoral level of the Democratic Party, they're backing like fascist tactics to try and crush public dissent against the genocide. So it's not just vote for us or else, it's fuck you, take this genocide and the nothing else that we're giving you. And here's some more cops if you don't like it. And then they have the nerve to threaten us with some Project 2025. Oh my God, the Republicans are going to do fascism. I'm sorry, but Project 2024, with you in the driver's seat, is bad enough. So yes, this is by far the worst election I've ever seen in my lifetime. And all I can tell you all that are planning on going out and voting for anyone other than Jill Stein or one of the lesser left-wing candidates, Godspeed to you. You're going to get what you deserve.